She stood at attention in the briefing room while snickers rippled through the assembled Rangers, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her determined face as Colonel Hartwell read through deployment assignments. Vanguard Base needs additional support personnel, medical, logistics, communications. His voice droned through the standard rotations, but when he paused at her name, Lieutenant Alexis Kane stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations. Sir, I request assignment to frontline combat operations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The room erupted in barely contained laughter. Sergeant Torres nearly choked on his coffee while Corporal Williams nudged his buddy with an elbow. Did she just say combat? Someone whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe she meant catering combat. Came another voice, followed by a wave of chuckles that Colonel Hartwell didn't bother to silence his own eyebrows, raised in what might have been amusement or disbelief. Kane, you're assigned to base communications, that's final, he said dismissively, already moving on to the next name, but Alexis remained standing, her posture rigid, her gray eyes fixed on something beyond the smirking faces surrounding her. With respect, sir, my marksmanship scores exceed 70% of this unit. I've completed advanced tactical training, and my psychological evaluations show optimal stress response under combat conditions. The laughter grew louder, now Staff Sergeant Murphy slapping his knee. Oh, this is rich, the little lady wants to play soldier, he wheezed. What's next, gonna ask for tank commander too? More voices joined in, creating a chorus of mockery that filled the cramped briefing room like toxic smoke. Sweetheart, Corporal Davis called out, his voice dripping with condescension. Combat's not about hitting paper targets on a sunny day, it's about blood and chaos and making split-second decisions when people are trying to kill you. Alexis never flinched, never broke eye contact with the colonel, her hands steady at her sides while the jeers continued around her. She'd heard it all before, during basic training, during advanced courses, during every assignment where she'd tried to prove herself worthy of more than administrative duties. I understand the nature of combat, sir, she replied, her voice level and controlled, and I'm prepared for that responsibility. Prepared? Lieutenant Brooks stood up, his bulk casting a shadow across her smaller frame. Lady, you wouldn't last 5 minutes in real combat. He gestured broadly to the room. These men have been in firefights where the enemy doesn't give a damn about your feelings or your paperwork scores. They've seen friends die. They've made the hard calls under pressure. You think because you can hit a bullseye at 300 meters, you're ready for war? The room buzzed with agreement, heads nodding as the assembled soldiers reinforced each other's skepticism about the quiet woman who'd somehow earned her lieutenant's bars through what they assumed was bureaucratic necessity rather than actual competence. Colonel Hartwell shuffled through his papers, clearly eager to move past this disruption. Kane, report to communications officer Reynolds at 0800 hours. Dismissed. But something in her stillness, something in the way she absorbed their ridicule without reaction, should have warned them. Something in those steel gray eyes that never wavered, never showed hurt or anger, should have made them pause, because 7 days later, when the mortar started falling and enemy snipers had pinned down Alpha Squad in the valley below, it would be Alexis Kane lying prone on the communications tower with a Barrett M82 rifle scanning the mountainside for targets at distances that made grown men's hands shake. 7 days later, when Sergeant Torres was bleeding out behind a concrete barrier and Corporal Williams was screaming for covering fire, it would be the same woman they'd mocked who would chamber a .50 caliber round and peer through her scope at a target nearly a kilometer away in conditions that would challenge Olympic shooters. 7 days later, when the enemy's heavy machine gun nest at every approach route covered and rescue seemed impossible, it would be Lieutenant Alexis Kane who would control her breathing, steady her heartbeat, and take a shot that physics textbooks said was nearly impossible. 7 days later, those same men who'd laughed at her combat request would Her not just their respect but their lives, and in that moment, when her rifle spoke, across the impossible distance they would learn what Colonel Hartwell already suspected but had been too political to acknowledge, that sometimes the most dangerous soldiers are the ones who ask quietly for the chance to prove themselves, rather than the ones who announce their prowess to anyone who listen. But that revelation was still a week away, hidden behind training exercises, equipment checks, and the steady rhythm of base operations that lulled everyone into thinking they understood who belonged where and why on this particular morning. In the briefing room of Camp Meridian, the only sound after Colonel Hartwell's dismissal was the scraping of chairs and the continued chuckling of soldiers who thought they'd just witnessed an amusing moment of misplaced ambition rather than a preview of their own salvation, as Alexis gathered her papers and walked toward the exit, maintaining her military bearing despite the smirks that followed her movement. None of them noticed the steady confidence in her stride. None of them saw the calculating way her eyes measured distances and angles, even in an indoor space. None of them recognized the signs of someone who'd spent countless hours preparing for exactly this kind of dismissal and exactly this kind of opportunity. To prove them wrong, the door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving behind a room full of men who thought they knew everything about combat readiness and nothing at all about the woman who would soon redefine their understanding of both precision and courage under fire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Picture this: a reinforced enemy position carved into solid rock 1,500 feet above the valley floor. Alpha Squad lay trapped like fish in a barrel machine gun fire, raking the ground every few seconds, keeping heads down and hopes fading. Fast medics couldn't reach the wounded, extraction helicopters couldn't land, and every minute that ticked by meant another step closer to a massacre that would make headlines for all the wrong reasons. One woman perched on a communications tower with a rifle that weighed more than some soldiers could comfortably carry, her eye pressed to a scope that revealed a target smaller than a dinner plate, at a distance where most people couldn't even see the enemy position. With binoculars, wind gusting at 20 knots across a canyon that turned ballistics calculations into educated guesswork, and weather conditions that made veteran snipers pack up their gear and wait for better days. But Lieutenant Alexis Kane wasn't most people, and this wasn't going to be most days, because what happened in those next 30 seconds would transform her from the woman they laughed at in briefings to the soldier they'd follow into hell itself. The shot she was about to take would violate every assumption they'd made about combat readiness, gender roles, and what real heroism looks like under pressure. When the stakes couldn't be higher and failure meant watching good soldiers die, the mathematics alone were staggering: 1,137 meters of mountain air between muzzle and target, accounting for bullet drop that would make the projectile fall nearly 8 feet from its initial trajectory, crosswinds that could push a .50 caliber round 3 feet off course, and atmospheric pressure that turned precision shooting into an art form requiring instincts that couldn't be taught, only discovered under fire, when everything depends on reading conditions that computers struggle to calculate. What she did with that single trigger pull would silence every joke about women in combat, every snicker about her combat request, every assumption about who belongs on the front lines, because in 30 seconds the same men who'd mocked her qualifications would be radioing frantically for extraction, while she provided the covering fire that kept them breathing long enough to see their families again. The enemy sniper who'd been picking off Alpha Squad one careful shot at a time thought he was invisible behind his rocky fortress, protected by distance, elevation, and the natural assumption that no opposing force could reach him at that range. But he'd never encountered someone who'd been preparing for exactly this moment through years of dismissed applications, overlooked qualifications, and quiet determination to prove that expertise doesn't announce itself with swagger. 7 days earlier they'd laughed when she requested combat assignment, dismissing her as another bureaucratic diversity hire who'd probably freeze up the first time bullets Started flying real soldiers they said needed real combat experience, not range scores and psychological evaluations, but real. Soldiers were about to discover that sometimes the most lethal warriors are the ones who've been systematically underestimated by everyone around them. What followed would become required study at sniper schools across 3 continents. A textbook example of impossible shots made possible by preparation opportunity and the kind of ice-cold nerve that can't be faked or trained, only revealed when everything hangs in the balance and there's nobody else. Who can make the shot that saves lives? Same rifle they'd seen her cleaning obsessively in the armory while making jokes about overcompensation was about to speak across impossible distance with authority that would end arguments about women in combat once and for all. Have you ever walked into a room where everyone immediately decided you didn't belong before you even opened your mouth, that crushing weight of assumptions pressing down on your shoulders while voices around you discussed your limitations, as if you weren't standing right there, listening to every dismissive word, every casual joke about your capabilities, every prediction about your inevitable failure in whatever challenge lay ahead? Maybe you were the quiet one in a group of loud personalities, watching them dominate conversations and make decisions while treating your input like background noise that could be safely ignored until crisis hit, and suddenly everyone needed exactly the kind of careful thinking they'd been dismissing all along. Or perhaps you were the technical expert in a room full of people who valued charisma over competence, watching them choose flashy presentations over thorough analysis until the moment their chosen approach fell apart, and they desperately needed someone who actually understood the details. You've ever felt that burning sensation of being underestimated? Drop a YES in the comments right now, because what happened to Lieutenant Alexis Kane happens every single day to people who don't fit the expected mold, people whose qualifications get questioned, not because they lack skills, but because they don't match someone else's narrow vision of what expertise should look like. And if you've ever had to prove yourself twice as hard for half the recognition, if you've ever been told you're not ready for opportunities you've been preparing for your entire life, if you've ever watched less qualified people get chances you were denied because they seemed more like what decision makers expected, then you understand the quiet fury that drives someone to perfect their craft in solitude, waiting for the moment when performance speaks louder than prejudice. Type ready in the comments if you believe that true strength often comes wrapped in packages that don't announce themselves with fanfare, because the most dangerous people in any field are usually the ones who've been systematically underestimated by everyone around them, the ones who've learned to let their work do the talking while others waste energy on self-promotion. But here's what makes Lieutenant Kane's story different from the thousands of similar stories that happen every day in boardrooms, classrooms, laboratories, and military bases around the world. Her moment of vindication came with life or death stakes where being wrong meant watching good people die, where there was no second chance, no do-over, no opportunity to explain why the shot missed. Most of us get to prove ourselves in meetings or presentations or performance reviews where the worst case scenarios, professional embarrassment, or missed promotions. But Kane had to demonstrate her worth while enemy bullets were flying, while Alpha Squad was bleeding out in a valley, and while an entire base full of skeptics was about to discover whether their assumptions about women in combat were correct or catastrophically wrong. Hit that subscribe button right now if you want to hear more stories about unsung heroes who changed minds through actions, not arguments, because this channel is dedicated to finding those moments when quiet competence defeats loud prejudice, when preparation meets opportunity, and when someone everyone wrote off becomes the person everyone owes their lives to. Share this video if you know someone who's been underestimated, someone who's been told they don't belong, someone who's been laughed at for having ambitions that don't match other people's expectations of what they should want or what they should be capable of achieving. Because Kane's story isn't just about one woman and one impossible shot, it's about every person who's ever been dismissed and then proven their dismissers spectacularly wrong. Reason stories like this matter isn't just because they're inspiring, though. It's because they reveal something crucial about how we evaluate talent and potential in our society, how often we mistake confidence for competence, how frequently we confuse loudness with leadership, and how consistently we undervalue the kind of steady, quiet excellence that actually gets things done when pressure peaks. Comment below and tell us about a time when you were underestimated. When someone assumed you couldn't handle a challenge based on their preconceptions rather than your actual abilities. When you had to prove yourself in ways that others didn't, because you didn't fit their mental picture of what success looks like in your field, because Lieutenant Alexis Kane's story starts with laughter in a briefing room where seasoned soldiers couldn't imagine that the woman asking for combat assignment might actually be more qualified for frontline duty than half the men who were automatically assumed to belong there. But it ends with a moment of precision that redefined everyone's understanding of what combat readiness actually means. And if you stick around for this complete story, you're going to discover that the same rifle discipline that made them mock her range practice was exactly what saved their lives when conventional tactics failed, and only surgical precision could thread the needle between victory and catastrophe. Ring that notification bell, because we're just getting started with this incredible account of how one woman's refused combat request became the shot heard around Camp Meridian, and why her story needs to be told, shared, and remembered by anyone who's ever been told they don't have what it takes to succeed in someone else's definition of their field. The comment section is where this community comes together to share experiences, support each other, and celebrate the kind of quiet heroes who change the world one perfect shot at a time. So don't just watch this story, become part of it by sharing your own moments of proving the doubters wrong. Camp Meridian wasn't just another forward operating base carved into the mountainous terrain of the Quebec Peninsula. It was the kind of assignment that separated career soldiers from weekend warriors, where survival depended on split-second decisions, and the luxury of hesitation could get you and everyone around you killed. Established 3 years earlier as a strategic monitoring post overlooking the volatile border region between Allied territory and hostile forces, controlled by insurgent networks that had been perfecting guerrilla warfare for decades. Base itself represented military engineering at its most pragmatic: concrete bunkers reinforced against mortar attacks, communication towers bristling with advanced surveillance equipment, and defensive positions strategically placed to maximize overlapping fields of fire across the surrounding valleys. Getting assigned to Meridian meant you were either being punished for something or recognized as elite material capable of operating in conditions where backup might be hours away and enemy contact was measured in, when not if. Colonel James Hartwell commanded this outpost with the kind of weathered authority that came from 23 years of active service, including 2 tours in the desert campaigns of Kandahar province and a classified operation in the Balkans that had earned him a chest full of ribbons. He rarely wore. His philosophy was simple: the best soldiers were forged under pressure, and Camp Meridian provided pressure in abundance, from the constant threat of sniper fire from the surrounding ridgelines to the knowledge that supply convoys faced ambush risks on every approach road. Men under his command represented what military recruitment posters promised but seldom delivered. Sergeant First Class Miguel Torres, a demolitions expert from East Los Angeles who could turn household cleaning supplies into precision explosives. Corporal Jake Williams, a communications specialist from rural Montana whose ability to maintain radio contact through electronic jamming had saved 3 different units from friendly fire incidents. Staff Sergeant Patrick Murphy, a former Marine reconnaissance specialist whose knowledge of mountain warfare tactics made him invaluable for training new arrivals. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Brooks brought urban combat experience from peacekeeping operations in Eastern European cities, where every street corner could hide a sniper and every abandoned building might conceal an improvised explosive device. Corporal Vincent Davis had earned his stripes during night raids in jungle environments where navigation required instincts that GPS systems couldn't replicate, and where silence meant survival in hostile territory crawling with enemy patrols, these weren't regular infantry soldiers pulled from standard training programs. They were specialists selected for their ability to operate independently, under extreme stress, to make life or death decisions without supervision, and to maintain mission effectiveness even when cut off from command structure. For extended periods, getting into this unit required not just exceptional test scores, but proven performance under combat conditions that would break lesser soldiers. The selection process for Camp Meridian assignment involved psychological evaluations that probed for stress responses under simulated combat conditions, physical endurance tests that pushed candidates beyond normal human limits, and tactical assessments that required innovative thinking. When standard procedures failed, candidates who made it through were expected to function as force multipliers capable of accomplishing objectives that would normally require twice their numbers. But Lieutenant Alexis Kane's assignment hadn't followed the typical selection pathway. Her personnel file showed exceptional marksmanship scores from advanced infantry school, performance ratings that placed her in the top 5% of her class, and psychological evaluations indicating unusual stress resilience. But her combat experience consisted of training exercises and simulated scenarios, rather than actual firefights where people died when mistakes were made. The unofficial word among the enlisted men was that Kane represented political correctness run amok, another diversity hire meant to satisfy Pentagon quotas rather than genuine military necessity. They'd seen it before. Qualified male candidates passed over so that statistics could reflect more balanced gender representation in elite units, regardless of whether those assignments served actual combat readiness or just made bureaucrats feel progressive. What they didn't know was that Colonel Hartwell had specifically requested her transfer after reviewing classified assessments from her training instructors, reports that described shooting abilities bordering on supernatural and situational awareness that allowed her to identify threats other soldiers missed entirely. Her advanced sniper course instructor had written that Kane demonstrated the kind of natural ability that appeared perhaps once in a decade among military marksmen. The base's armory reflected the serious nature of their mission. Barrett M82 antimaterial rifles capable of disabling vehicles at extreme range, advanced optic systems that could acquire targets in conditions where normal scopes became useless, night vision equipment that allowed effective operations during the pitch-black mountain nights that provided cover for enemy movement, and enough ammunition to sustain prolonged engagement without resupply. Training protocols at Meridian emphasized scenarios that regular bases never contemplated: what to do when surrounded by superior numbers, how to coordinate defensive fire when communication systems were compromised, techniques for calling in air support when GPS jamming prevented accurate target designation, and methods for treating combat casualties when medical evacuation wasn't possible for hours or days. The surrounding terrain made every training exercise a lesson in mountain warfare, where elevation changes affected weapon performance, where weather conditions could shift from clear visibility to blinding snowstorms within minutes, and where enemy forces familiar with local geography held every advantage except the superior training and equipment that American forces brought to each engagement. This was the environment where Lieutenant Alexis Kane found herself, assigned to communications duty while longing for the kind of frontline combat role that would allow her to demonstrate capabilities that transcended whatever assumptions her colleagues had formed about women, military service, and environment, where being wrong about someone's abilities could cost lives, and where traditional thinking about gender roles was about to collide with battlefield reality in ways that would change everyone's perspective permanently. Alexis Kane's journey to Camp Meridian began in the windswept prairies of North Dakota, where her father operated a cattle ranch that stretched across 15,000 acres of land so remote that the nearest neighbor lived 40 minutes away by truck, and the closest town consisted of a general store, a gas station, and a diner that served the same 3 meals every day for 30 years, growing up in that isolation taught her patience, observation skills, and the kind of self-reliance that couldn't be learned from textbooks. Her introduction to precision shooting came at age 12 when Coyote started killing calves near the eastern pastures. Her father, Victor Kane, a former Army Ranger who'd lost his left leg below the knee during a training accident, handed her his old Remington 700 and explained that ranch life sometimes required making difficult shots at distances where missing meant losing livestock they couldn't afford to replace. Breathing control, he told her during those first lessons, is everything else is just mathematics. By age 14, Alexis could consistently hit prairie dogs at 400 yards using iron sights while lying prone in grass that provided minimal stability. Her father watched through binoculars as she developed the kind of natural shooting ability that couldn't be taught, calling windage adjustments that experienced hunters struggled to make and demonstrating patience that allowed her to wait motionless for hours until the perfect shot presented itself. Local shooting competitions became weekend destinations where she competed against ranch hands, hunters, and military veterans who'd returned home to rural communities after serving overseas. Her first trophy came at 16 when she outshot 47 adult competitors, including 3 former Marine snipers, during a long-range precision match that required hitting targets from 300 to 800 yards under varying wind conditions. Local competition circuit introduced her to Wesley Hammond, a retired Army Sergeant Major who'd spent 12 years as a sniper instructor at Fort Benning, before returning to his hometown to run a gunsmith shop that catered to serious marksmen. Hammond watched her shoot during a regional championship and afterward approached her father with an offer to provide advanced training that went far beyond recreational shooting. That girl has something special, he told Victor Kane. Steadiest hands I've seen since I stopped teaching, and instincts you can't train. Under Hammond's instruction, Alexis learned ballistics calculations that turned shooting from art into science, studying how temperature affected powder burn rates, how humidity changed bullet trajectory, and how atmospheric pressure at different elevations could make the difference between hitting center mass and missing entirely. She practiced with military specification equipment, learning to use rangefinders, laser designators, and advanced optic systems that cost more than most people's cars. Hammond introduced her to combat shooting scenarios that simulated battlefield conditions, moving targets, partially concealed positions, and time pressure that required instant decision-making rather than the leisurely precision of competition shooting. Competition teaches you to shoot, he explained during one training session. Combat teaches you when to shoot, and that's the harder skill to master. Her application to West Point came with recommendation letters from Hammond, whose connections to active duty personnel carried significant weight, and from a retired colonel who'd witnessed her performance during a civilian marksmanship clinic, where she demonstrated abilities that exceeded many active duty soldiers. The acceptance letter arrived along with a note suggesting she consider pursuing advanced infantry training with emphasis on long-range reconnaissance. Military academy life presented challenges that had nothing to do with academic requirements or physical fitness standards. Alexis found herself constantly defending her choice to pursue combat arms rather than military intelligence or logistics roles that academy advisors suggested would better suit her background. Female cadets were encouraged towards support specialties, while combat positions remained unofficially reserved for male students despite official policies. Promoting gender equality, Advanced Infantry School provided her first encounter with military skepticism about women in frontline roles, despite scoring in the top percentile of every marksmanship assessment and demonstrating tactical knowledge that impressed instructors. She faced constant questions about her motivation, her commitment, and her ability to perform under real combat stress rather than controlled training conditions that allowed for mistakes. The Advanced Sniper course represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship training, where candidates learn to engage targets at distances exceeding 1,000 meters under conditions that challenged the limits of human precision and equipment capability. Out of 43 students who began the course, only 18 graduated, and Alexis finished second overall with shooting scores that set new course records in 3 categories. Her instructor, Captain Richard Valdez, wrote in his final assessment that Kane demonstrated exceptional natural ability combined with discipline and mental toughness, rarely seen in students regardless of gender or background, but noted that her lack of actual combat experience might limit initial assignment options until she could prove herself under fire rather than just in training environments. Psychological evaluations that accompanied her advanced sniper course completion painted a picture of someone uniquely suited for high-stress combat operations, showing stress responses that remained stable under simulated combat conditions, decision-making abilities that improved rather than deteriorated under pressure, and situational awareness that allowed her to process multiple threat indicators simultaneously while maintaining focus on primary objectives. What the evaluations couldn't measure was the quiet determination that had been building through years of being told she was impressive for a woman, rather than simply impressive. The accumulated frustration of watching less qualified male soldiers receive opportunities she was denied, and the burning need to prove that excellence had no gender requirements when lives depended on precision and judgment, rather than assumptions and stereotypes. Her personnel file contained commendations from every training program she'd completed, instructor recommendations that praised both her technical skills and leadership potential, and test scores that placed her among the most qualified soldiers in her specialty, regardless of gender. But somehow, none of that seemed to matter when assignment time came, and she found herself heading to Camp Meridian as a communications specialist rather than the sniper role. Her qualifications clearly supported the same steady hands that had learned to shoot coyotes on her father's ranch, the same eyes that could spot movement at distances where others saw only landscape, and the same mind that calculated wind, drift, and bullet drop with mathematical precision were about to be tested under conditions that would either validate years of preparation or expose the gap between training excellence and combat reality. Camp Meridian shooting range became Alexis Kane's sanctuary during off-duty hours, while other soldiers gathered in the recreation tent, swapping stories and playing cards, or hit the makeshift gym to blow off steam. She could be found methodically working through precision drills that pushed the boundaries of what the range's equipment could measure. Her targets consistently showed groupings so tight they appeared to be single bullet holes, until closer inspection revealed the surgical precision of multiple rounds passing through nearly identical entry points. Sergeant Torres discovered this during his first week at the base when insomnia drove him to take a late-night walk past the range facility. The sound of methodical rifle fire drew his attention, and through the chain-link fence he watched Kane work through a series of shots at the maximum range distance, 450 meters each round, finding its mark with mechanical consistency that made him question whether the equipment was malfunctioning somehow. "Impressive shooting for a communications specialist," he commented the next morning during weapons maintenance, his tone carrying the subtle condescension that had become familiar to Kane since her arrival. "Course the range here's pretty basic compared to what you'd face in real tactical situations. Wind doesn't cooperate like it does during practice, and targets have this annoying habit of shooting back." Kane nodded politely while cleaning her rifle with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. "The fundamentals remain consistent regardless of external factors," she replied, her voice level and professional. "Breathing control, sight alignment, trigger, discipline. These don't change whether you're on a range or in combat." Corporal Williams overheard the exchange and decided to contribute his own wisdom gained from 6 months of periodic skirmishes with insurgent forces. "Fundamentals are fine for basic qualification," he said loud enough for everyone in the armory to hear. "But combat shooting is about speed under pressure, about making snap decisions." When adrenaline is pumping and your heart rate is through the roof, you think you're little target. Practice translates to engaging hostile forces who know how to use cover and concealment. The informal shooting competitions that developed among them. Unit provided Kane with opportunities to demonstrate capabilities that extended far beyond basic marksmanship during impromptu contests involving rapid-fire scenarios, multiple target engagements, and challenging conditions designed to simulate combat stress. She consistently outperformed soldiers whose combat experience was supposed to give them decisive advantages. Staff Sergeant Murphy organized a weekend competition that involved shooting from improvised positions using inadequate rest support and dealing with time pressure designed to rattle concentration. "Let's see how the desk jockey handles some real shooting," he announced while setting up targets at varying distances, some partially concealed behind barriers that required precise shot placement to achieve scoring hits. Kane approached each station with the same calm deliberation that characterized her training routine, analyzing the shooting problem, calculating holdover for elevated targets, and adjusting for the gusty mountain wind that made precision difficult even for experienced marksmen. Her first shot from the prone position at 300 meters punched through the target's center ring, followed by 4 more rounds that clustered within a 2-inch group. "Lucky wind," someone muttered, but Kane's performance at the next station silenced casual dismissal shooting from an awkward kneeling position at targets that appeared briefly behind moving barriers. She achieved perfect scores while other shooters struggled with the unfamiliar timing and restricted sight lines. Her movements flowed with practiced efficiency that spoke of countless hours perfecting techniques under artificial pressure. Competition's final stage required shooting from a standing position at targets placed at 4 different distances while wearing full combat gear that restricted movement and added fatigue factors designed to degrade performance. Kane chambered her rounds with steady hands that showed no tremor despite the physical stress and delivered shots that struck each target within the scoring rings with margins that left spectators checking the spotting scopes to verify the results. Lieutenant Brooks watched through binoculars as Kane's final shot completed a perfect score that exceeded the performance of soldiers who'd been bragging about their combat shooting abilities for months. "Not bad for range work," he commented with forced casualness. "Course hitting stationary paper targets in daylight with unlimited time to set up your shots is pretty different from engaging enemies who move and shoot back." The patronizing tone that accompanied every acknowledgement of her shooting abilities became a constant reminder that competence alone wouldn't earn respect from soldiers who'd already decided she didn't belong in their combat fraternity. Every perfect score was dismissed as range luck. Every demonstration of tactical knowledge was attributed to textbook learning rather than genuine understanding, and every suggestion she offered during tactical discussions was politely ignored or explained back to her by men who assumed she needed basic concepts clarified. During night firing exercises where reduced visibility challenged even experienced shooters, Kane adapted to the difficult conditions with equipment familiarity that surprised instructors who expected communications personnel to struggle with advanced optics and targeting systems. Her night vision shooting scores consistently ranked among the top performers. Despite using equipment she supposedly had no business knowing how to operate effectively. "Maybe she's been practicing more than we thought," Corporal Davis suggested after reviewing score sheets that showed Kane outperforming infantry specialists during low-light engagements. "Or maybe the scoring system needs recalibration because those numbers don't match what I'd expect from someone without real combat experience." The psychological warfare was subtle but persistent. Every achievement was qualified with explanations about why range performance didn't translate to battlefield effectiveness. Every display of technical knowledge was dismissed as theoretical rather than practical. And every attempt to contribute to tactical planning was met with patient condescension that suggested she should focus on her assigned communications duties rather than trying to participate in real soldier activities. Colonel Hartwell observed these dynamics during training exercises where Kane's performance consistently exceeded expectations, while her colleagues found new ways to minimize her achievements. "Interesting how someone keeps surprising us," he mentioned during one post-exercise, briefing his tone carefully neutral, almost like we might be underestimating capabilities based on incomplete information. The armory became another venue for displaying competence that was systematically dismissed. Kane's weapon maintenance exceeded military standards with attention to detail that kept her equipment functioning flawlessly under conditions that caused other soldiers' rifles to malfunction, but her expertise was attributed to having extra time for cleaning rather than superior technical knowledge. Her ability to field strip and reassemble complex weapon systems while blindfolded emerged during equipment inspections that were supposed to test basic proficiency levels. Kane completed the exercise faster than infantry specialists, who worked with the equipment daily, but observers credited muscle memory from excessive practice rather than acknowledging the deep mechanical understanding that enabled such performance. Range safety became an additional avenue for demonstrating knowledge that was consistently undervalued. Kane spotted dangerous conditions and unsafe practices that experienced soldiers missed, preventing potential accidents through observation skills that extended beyond marksmanship into comprehensive situational awareness. But her interventions were treated as fortunate catches rather than evidence of superior training and judgment. The pattern repeated endlessly. Competence demonstrated, skepticism reinforced achievements, minimized, and capabilities dismissed as somehow not representative of real-world performance, despite mounting evidence that Kane possessed skills exceeding many combat veterans who questioned her qualifications based on gender rather than demonstrated ability. The stage was being set for a reckoning that would either validate their assumptions or expose them as catastrophically wrong about what combat readiness actually meant. The intelligence briefing arrived at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning when Camp Meridian was shrouded in the kind of mountain fog that reduced visibility to mere yards and muffled sounds until the base felt isolated from the rest of the world. Colonel Hartwell's voice crackled through the intercom system, summoning all personnel to the main briefing room for what he described as urgent tactical updates requiring immediate attention and revised operational procedures. Satellite imagery spread across the illuminated table revealed movement patterns that intelligence analysts had been tracking for 72 hours. Enemy forces estimated at company strength. Approximately 120 hostile combatants had been infiltrating the region through mountain passes, previously considered too difficult for large-scale troop movements. Their progress suggested coordination and planning that indicated this wasn't a random probe, but a deliberate operation targeting Camp Meridian specifically. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem," Colonel Hartwell announced, his weathered face grim in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Intercepted communications indicate enemy forces are planning a coordinated assault on this facility within the next 48 to 72 hours. Their objective appears to be capturing our communications equipment and eliminating our monitoring capabilities in this sector." The enemy's tactical approach revealed sophisticated understanding of the base's defensive capabilities. Rather than attempting a direct frontal assault that would favor the defenders, they were positioning forces to control the high ground surrounding Camp Meridian, establishing overlapping fields of fire that would make reinforcement or evacuation extremely difficult once the attack commenced. Staff Sergeant Murphy studied the terrain maps with growing concern. "Sir, these positions would give them direct line of sight to our entire perimeter. They could pin us down indefinitely and pick off anyone who tries to move between buildings or reach the vehicle depot." His finger traced potential enemy sight lines that covered every major approach and defensive position within the base. Lieutenant Brooks identified additional complications in the enemy's positioning. "Colonel, if they establish sniper teams on these ridgelines here and here, they'll have overlapping coverage of the landing zone. Helicopter extraction becomes impossible, and ground reinforcement would require fighting uphill against Prepared positions with superior elevation and concealment. Intelligence briefing continued with details that painted an increasingly challenging picture. Enemy forces included experienced mountain warfare specialists who've been operating in the region for months, learning the terrain and developing tactics specifically designed to neutralize American technological advantages through superior positioning and intimate knowledge of local geography. Corporal Williams reviewed communication intercepts that revealed the enemy's timeline, sir, based on radio traffic analysis. They're planning to complete positioning by tomorrow evening and initiate the assault at dawn the following day. That gives us approximately 36 hours to prepare defensive measures or request immediate evacuation. Colonel Hartwell's response eliminated the evacuation option immediately. Negative on extraction. Orders from division are clear. We maintain this position and continue monitoring operations until relieved. Evacuation is authorized only in case of catastrophic equipment failure or casualty rates exceeding 75% of personnel. The defensive planning session that followed revealed the stark reality of their tactical situation. Camp Meridian's defensive positions had been designed to repel probing attacks and small-scale infiltration attempts, not sustained assault by a numerically superior force with intimate terrain knowledge and carefully planned positioning that negated most of the base's defensive advantages. Sergeant Torres outlined their weapons inventory with sobering precision. We have sufficient ammunition for sustained engagement, but our heavy weapons are positioned to defend against valley approaches, not elevated threats from multiple directions. Simultaneously repositioning would require exposing personnel to sniper fire from established enemy positions. The base's communication tower represented both their most valuable asset and their greatest vulnerability. Standing 40 feet above the surrounding buildings, it provided essential radio contact with higher headquarters, but also offered enemy snipers a prominent target whose destruction would isolate Camp Meridian from external support. Lieutenant Kane listened to the tactical discussion while studying the satellite imagery with increasing focus. Her eyes traced sight lines and elevation data that others were discussing in theoretical terms, but she was calculating with the precision of someone who understood exactly what those numbers meant in terms of ballistic trajectories and shooting solutions. Sir, she spoke for the first time during the briefing, her voice cutting through the discussion with quiet authority. The enemy's positioning assumes we can't effectively engage targets at extended range beyond 800 meters. Their sniper positions are placed to be safe from our standard infantry weapons, but they're well within range for precision rifle systems. The room fell silent as heads turned toward the communication specialist who was supposed to be listening rather than contributing to tactical planning. Staff Sergeant Murphy's expression showed barely concealed irritation. Kane, those positions are over 1,000 meters away in mountainous terrain with unpredictable wind conditions and limited sight lines. Even experienced snipers would struggle with shots like that. Kane's response demonstrated familiarity with the tactical situation that surprised everyone present. The eastern ridge position is 1,137 meters from the communication tower, with clear sight lines during morning hours when thermal currents are stable. Wind patterns in this valley show consistent direction and velocity between 800 and 1,000 hours, and the elevation difference provides favorable ballistic angles for long-range engagement. Colonel Hartwell studied her with new interest. Kane, what makes you think we have assets capable of engaging targets at those distances under field conditions rather than controlled range environments? The question hung in the air while Kane considered her response carefully, knowing that her answer would either establish her credibility or confirm everyone's assumptions about communications personnel overstepping their expertise. Sir, the armory contains Barrett M82 anti-materiel rifles with advanced optic systems designed specifically for engagements exceeding 1,000 meters and personnel qualified to operate that equipment effectively under combat conditions. Lieutenant Brooks couldn't resist challenging the assertion. Qualified according to range scores, maybe, but combat Shooting at extreme distances requires experience that can't be simulated in training environments. When you're dealing with moving targets, variable conditions, and return fire from enemy positions, the briefing concluded with assignments that reflected traditional thinking about personnel capabilities. Alpha Squad would man the primary defensive positions. Bravo Squad would provide mobile response to breakthrough attempts. Charlie Squad would secure the communication equipment and ensure continued contact with higher headquarters, while support personnel including Kane would maintain essential services from protected positions. As personnel filed out to begin defensive preparations, Colonel Hartwell caught Kane's attention with a gesture that indicated she should remain behind. Lieutenant, your assessment of the long-range engagement possibilities was remarkably detailed for someone assigned to communications. Duties. Care to explain where that expertise comes from? Kane's response was characteristically direct. Sir, my training includes advanced marksmanship and tactical assessment. My assignment to communications doesn't negate qualifications that might prove relevant to our current tactical situation. What she didn't mention was that she'd already begun calculating shooting solutions for every enemy position visible in the satellite imagery. Her mind automatically processing wind speed, elevation differences, and atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet trajectory. At distances where most soldiers couldn't even see targets clearly, stage was set for a confrontation that would test everyone's assumptions about combat capabilities, gender roles, and what happened when theoretical planning met battlefield reality. In 36 hours, the enemy would attack and camp. Meridian would discover whether their defensive preparations and personnel assignments were based on accurate assessment or dangerous prejudice. Dawn broke over Camp Meridian with deceptive tranquility. The mountain peaks catching first light while shadows still clung to the valleys below, creating the kind of pristine morning that made it hard to believe enemy forces were positioning themselves for an assault that could begin within hours. Alexis Kane stood at her assigned communications station, monitoring radio frequencies while her eyes constantly swept the surrounding ridgelines through high-powered binoculars that revealed details invisible to casual observation. At 0623 hours, she spotted the first anomaly, a brief metallic glint from the northwestern ridge, approximately 1,400 meters distant, lasting only a fraction of a second, but reflecting morning sunlight in a way that suggested manufactured materials rather than natural mineral deposits in the rock face. Her training had taught her to catalog such observations methodically rather than jumping to conclusions, but the location matched perfectly with intelligence predictions about enemy sniper positioning. Control, this is communications, she reported through her headset, maintaining the professional tone required for military radio protocols. Possible metallic reflection. Observed grid reference 774289 Northwestern Ridge, bearing 295 degrees distance, approximately 1,400 meters. Advise visual confirmation. Sergeant Torres responded from the main observation post with casual dismissal that had become routine when Kane reported unusual observations. Communications negative on visual confirmation from primary observation. Post probably mineral deposits catching morning light. We've got bigger concerns than geology lessons right now. Maintain radio watch and report actual enemy contact. Kane adjusted her binoculars, focusing on the area where she'd observed the reflection while continuing to monitor communication frequencies that crackled with routine morning reports from perimeter guards who saw nothing unusual in their assigned sectors. The northwestern ridge remained motionless, but something about the shadow patterns seemed wrong, as if natural rock formations had been subtly altered to provide concealment for artificial objects. 20 minutes later, movement in her peripheral vision drew attention to the eastern approaches, where intelligence had predicted secondary enemy positioning. Through her binoculars, she observed what appeared to be a small landslide cascade of loose stones tumbling down a steep slope that should have been stable given the current weather conditions and absence of seismic activity. Control possible movement Eastern Ridge Grid, reference 781304 evidence of recent disturbance in area marked stable by geological survey rocks falling from slopes that showed no previous erosion patterns. Request permission to investigate with enhanced optics. Staff Sergeant Murphy's voice carried undisguised irritation through the radio system. Communications, we've got real security concerns here, not imaginary threats based on falling rocks mountain. Environments have unstable slopes, that's why they call it difficult terrain. Focus on your assigned duties and leave tactical assessment to personnel trained for that responsibility. Kane continued her systematic observation while maintaining the communication watch that represented her official assignment, but her mind was processing environmental details that suggested human presence in areas where none should exist. The timing of the rockfall coincided perfectly with what would be expected if someone had dislodged stones while establishing a concealed position. Her third report came at 0751 hours when thermal imaging equipment revealed heat signatures that didn't match the natural warming patterns expected as morning sunlight heated rock surfaces. The signatures appeared and disappeared too quickly for geological phenomena, but matched the thermal profile of human movement behind concealment designed to mask such activity. Control thermal anomalies detected multiple locations corresponding to predicted enemy positioning patterns. Signatures consistent with personnel movement rather than natural heating cycles. Request authorization for enhanced surveillance protocols. Lieutenant Brooks responded with barely controlled exasperation. Kane, unless you're reporting confirmed visual contact with armed hostiles, keep the analysis to yourself. We don't need communications personnel playing junior intelligence officer when we've got actual threats to monitor. The dismissive responses followed a pattern that Kane had experienced throughout her military career. Her observations were consistently attributed to inexperience, overactive imagination, or misunderstanding of normal environmental conditions, rather than considered as potentially valuable intelligence from someone whose training included advanced surveillance techniques. At 0834 hours, she identified what appeared to be a camouflaged observation post on the southern ridge, where enemy spotters could monitor Camp Meridian's defensive preparations and radio information to assault teams about American positioning and capabilities. The concealment was expertly constructed using local materials that blended perfectly with natural terrain but created geometric patterns that didn't occur in nature. Control confirmed enemy observation, post-southern ridge grid reference 769417 camouflage position with clear sight lines to our defensive positions. Recommend immediate countermeasures to prevent intelligence gathering on our preparations. Colonel Hartwell's voice cut through the radio chatter with authority that demanded attention. Communications, what specifically did you observe that confirms enemy presence rather than natural terrain features? Provide detailed description of evidence supporting your assessment. Kane's response demonstrated familiarity with intelligence analysis that surprised everyone monitoring the communication channel. Sir, observed geometric shapes inconsistent with natural rock formation. Shadow patterns indicating artificial materials, positioned to provide concealment. Thermal signatures showing periodic movement consistent with human observation activities and reflection. Patterns suggesting optical equipment oriented toward our position. The command post erupted in discussion as personnel debated whether Kane's reports represented genuine intelligence or the overactive imagination of someone assigned beyond her competence level. Several voices argued that communication specialists lacked the training necessary for accurate threat assessment, while others suggested that dismissing potential intelligence could prove dangerous. Corporal Williams offered his assessment based on 6 months of combat experience in the region. Colonel, I've been watching those ridges for weeks and haven't seen anything that looked like enemy activity. Kane's been here, 2 weeks, and suddenly she's spotting threats that experienced infantry soldiers are missing. Doesn't add up. Kane continued monitoring her assigned frequencies while tracking additional movement indicators that supported her initial assessments. Enemy forces were clearly in position and conducting final preparations for an assault that would begin when tactical conditions favored their attack plan, but her warnings were being filtered through assumptions about her competence rather than evaluated on their technical merit. The intelligence she was gathering through systematic observation could provide critical advantages for defensive planning if anyone was willing to consider that a communications specialist might possess surveillance skills that exceeded their expectations, but the pattern of dismissal suggested that her warnings would continue to be discounted until enemy contact became undeniable. At 947 hours, she observed muzzle flashes from the eastern ridge as enemy snipers conducted ranging shots against targets near the base perimeter. The shots were deliberately aimed to miss while allowing shooters to calculate precise holdover adjustments for actual engagement distances, but the brief flashes provided confirmation of enemy positions that intelligence had predicted. Control confirmed enemy sniper activity. Eastern Ridge muzzle flashes observed during ranging exercise positions match intelligence estimates for planned assault preparation. Immediate countermeasures recommended before they complete ballistic calculations. This time the response carried new urgency as Sergeant Torres confirmed visual contact with enemy muzzle flashes. Confirmed muzzle flashes. Eastern Ridge, all personnel take cover. Enemy snipers are actively engaging. Prepare for immediate contact. The transformation from dismissive skepticism to urgent action happened within seconds as Kane's observations were suddenly validated by unmistakable evidence that enemy forces were exactly where she'd been reporting them for the past 3 hours. But the damage from delayed recognition was already accumulating as enemy snipers completed their preparations. While American forces scrambled to respond to threats that could have been addressed hours earlier, Alpha Squad was about to discover that the communications specialist they'd been ignoring possessed observation skills and tactical knowledge that exceeded many infantry soldiers, but that revelation would come during the kind of high-intensity combat where being wrong about someone's capabilities could cost lives. The first mortar round impacted at 11:47 hours, sending a shower of concrete fragments across the main courtyard as enemy forces initiated their assault with devastating precision that confirmed every observation Kane had been reporting throughout the morning. The explosion shattered windows in the communications building, while the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery announced that the probing phase was over and the real battle had begun. Within minutes, Cap Meridian transformed from a quiet mountain outpost into a combat zone where survival depended on split-second decisions and tactical expertise that training exercises could never fully simulate. Enemy snipers opened fire from the ridgeline positions Kane had identified, systematically targeting American personnel who exposed themselves while attempting to reach defensive positions. Alpha Squad found themselves pinned down in the eastern sector where Sergeant Torres discovered that the enemy sniper fire was coming from exactly the locations Kane had reported hours earlier. Control Alpha Squad, taking effective fire from Eastern Ridge. Enemy has precise range and windage data for our positions. Request immediate counter. Sniper support, Staff Sergeant. Murphy's voice crackled through the radio with urgent desperation that replaced his earlier dismissive confidence. Control Bravo Squad is taking casualties. Western approach enemy has overlapping fields of fire covering all movement between buildings. We need suppressive fire on those sniper positions immediately. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as enemy forces demonstrated the kind of coordinated precision that came from extensive preparation and intimate knowledge of Camp Meridian's defensive weaknesses. Their positioning negated most of the base's prepared defensive advantages, while their elevated positions provided clear sight lines for systematic elimination of American personnel. Colonel Hartwell's voice cut through the radio chaos with grim authority. All units, this is Control. Enemy has achieved tactical superiority through superior positioning and preparation. Defensive posture is failing. We need immediate solutions or we're Looking at complete base compromise, Lieutenant. Brooks reported from the medical station, where wounded personnel were accumulating faster than available resources could treat them. Control, we have multiple casualties, and enemy sniper fire is preventing. Medical evacuation. Wounded personnel are trapped in exposed positions without cover from continued enemy fire. The communication tower that represented Camp Meridian's lifeline to higher headquarters came under concentrated enemy fire as snipers attempted to sever contact with reinforcements and resupply operations. Their shots systematically destroyed antenna arrays and communication equipment while forcing personnel to abandon elevated positions that provided the best radio propagation. Kane found herself alone at the base of the communications tower as other personnel took cover in hardened positions that offered protection from sniper fire, but eliminated their ability to provide effective return fire against enemy positions beyond the range of standard infantry weapons. The Barrett M82 anti-materiel rifle lay in the armory 30 meters away, but reaching it would require crossing open ground under direct enemy observation. Control, this is Kane requesting permission to access long-range precision rifle for counter-sniper operations. Enemy positions are within effective range for Barrett M82 system. Can provide suppressive fire that standard infantry weapons cannot deliver. The radio channel erupted with conflicting voices as personnel debated whether communications specialist Kane possessed the expertise necessary for extreme long-range combat shooting, while enemy fire continued to pin down American forces and casualties mounted with each passing minute. Staff Sergeant Murphy's response reflected the desperation of their tactical situation. Kane, those shots are over 1,000 meters in combat conditions with enemy return fire. Are you absolutely certain you can make effective contact at those distances under current battlefield stress? Colonel Hartwell interrupted with command authority that settled the debate. Kane, what specific training qualifies you for precision rifle operations at extended range under combat conditions? Provide detailed assessment of your capabilities before we authorize this mission. Kane's response demonstrated familiarity with advanced marksmanship that surprised everyone monitoring the communication channel. Sir, Advanced Sniper Course graduate, specialization in extreme long-range engagement, qualified on Barrett M82 system with documented accuracy at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters under adverse conditions. Request immediate authorization to engage enemy sniper positions. The revelation that their communications specialist possessed elite sniper qualifications created stunned silence across the radio network as personnel processed the implications of having systematically underestimated someone whose expertise exceeded most infantry soldiers. But time was running out as enemy fire intensified and American casualties continued to accumulate. Lieutenant Brooks voiced the question everyone was thinking. Kane, if you're qualified for precision rifle operations, why the hell are you assigned to communications duty instead of frontline combat, where we obviously need that expertise right now? Kane's answer was characteristically direct while mortar rounds continued to impact around the base perimeter. Sir, assignment decisions were made based on factors other than technical qualifications. Request immediate authorization to access sniper rifle before enemy completes systematic elimination of our defensive positions. Colonel Hartwell made the command decision that would either save Camp Meridian or expose the catastrophic failure of their personnel assessment procedures. Kane, you are authorized to access Barrett M82 system and engage enemy sniper positions at your discretion. Use whatever means necessary to neutralize threats that are systematically destroying our defensive capabilities. The weight of responsibility settled on Kane's shoulders as she prepared to sprint across open ground to reach the armory, while enemy snipers maintained constant surveillance of the base perimeter, waiting for targets to expose themselves. One mistake would result in her death and the continued systematic elimination of American personnel who were trapped without effective counter sniper support. Sergeant Torres provided covering fire that forced enemy snipers to seek cover while Kane covered the distance to the armory in a combat rush that relied on speed and timing, rather than concealment, to avoid becoming another casualty in the mounting toll of camp meridians. Defensive failure inside the armory, she accessed the Barrett M82 system with practiced efficiency that demonstrated familiarity, gained through extensive training rather than casual acquaintance with the equipment. Her hands moved with automatic precision, checking the rifle's condition, loading the massive .50 caliber rounds, and adjusting the advanced optics system for the specific engagement. Distances she'd been calculating throughout the morning. The moment of truth had arrived as Kane prepared to climb the communications tower with 40 pounds of sniper rifle and ammunition, while enemy fire continued to rake the base perimeter. Everything she'd trained for, every skill she'd developed, and every assumption her colleagues had made about her capabilities was about to be tested under conditions where failure meant watching good soldiers. The radio chatter filled her earpiece with desperate reports from units that were running low on ammunition, taking mounting casualties, and losing the tactical initiative to enemy forces who held every geographical advantage except the one factor they hadn't anticipated: the presence of an American sniper qualified to engage targets at distances they'd assumed were safe from return fire. Kane began her ascent of the communications tower, knowing that the next few minutes would either validate years of preparation or expose the gap between training excellence and combat reality. While the fate of Camp Meridian and everyone defending it rested on her ability to make shots that challenged the limits of human precision under the worst possible conditions, time compressed into crystalline focus as Kane reached the communications tower's highest platform, 40 feet above the base perimeter, with the Barrett M82 rifle secured across her back and a tactical vest loaded with .50 caliber rounds that could punch through engine blocks at distances where other weapons became ineffective. The enemy sniper fire continued to echo across the valley as hostile forces systematically eliminated American defensive positions with methodical precision. Through her advanced optics system, Kane acquired the first target, 1,137 meters distant on the eastern ridge, where muzzle flashes had been appearing with deadly regularity throughout the assault. The enemy sniper was positioned behind a carefully constructed hide that provided excellent concealment from ground-level observation, but left him partially exposed to elevated sight lines from the communications tower. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that had been drilled into her through thousands of practice rounds. Inhale, hold, analyze. Exhale, hold, squeeze. The mathematics of extreme long-range shooting required calculating multiple variables simultaneously. Bullet drop over 1,100 meters would be approximately 36 inches, requiring significant holdover, while crosswinds gusting at 15 knots could push the massive .50 caliber projectile 4 feet off target if not properly compensated. The atmospheric conditions presented additional challenges. Altitude affected air density, which changed bullet velocity, while temperature gradients between the heated valley floor and cool mountain air created thermal currents that could deflect precision shots at extreme distances. Kane's training had taught her to read these invisible forces through subtle environmental indicators that most shooters never learned to recognize. Through her scope, she observed the enemy sniper's routine. He fired 3 rapid shots, then ducked behind cover for approximately 20 seconds before repositioning to engage additional targets. This pattern provided a narrow window of opportunity when he would be exposed, but required timing precision that left no margin for error. If she missed the first shot, he would relocate, and she might not get another chance. Kane chambered the first round, feeling the massive cartridge slide into position with mechanical precision that represented American manufacturing at its finest. The .50 caliber BMG round carried enough kinetic energy to disable vehicles at extreme distances, but hitting a human target smaller than 18 inches across at over 1,000 meters required shooting skills that pushed the boundaries of human capability. Her crosshairs settled on the area where the enemy sniper would appear based on his established pattern while she controlled her heartbeat. Through breathing techniques that kept her pulse steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, the rifle's advanced optics revealed details invisible to naked eye observation, including the slight movement of vegetation that indicated human presence behind camouflaged positions. Inhale, hold. The enemy sniper appeared exactly where Kane had predicted, his rifle barrel emerging from concealment as he prepared to engage American positions that couldn't return effective fire at his distance. Her calculations compressed into instinctive adjustments as crosswinds shifted slightly, requiring last-second compensation for bullet drift that could mean the difference between center mass hit and complete miss. The mathematical precision required for this shot challenged everything she'd learned about ballistics at 1137 meters. The bullet would require 1.4 seconds of flight time, during which the target could move significantly. If he detected the incoming round, her aim point had to anticipate not just where he was, but where he would be when the projectile arrived. Exhale, half the world narrowed to the space between heartbeats as Kane's finger applied steady pressure to the trigger that would release forces capable of delivering devastating kinetic energy across impossible distances. The Barrett M82 represented peak achievement in American sniper technology, but it still required human precision to guide its capabilities toward intended targets. Rifle's recoil transferred through her shoulder with authority that reminded her of the massive energies involved in extreme long-range shooting, while the distinctive crack of the .50 caliber round announced to everyone within miles that serious firepower had entered the engagement. The muzzle blast created a signature that would reveal her position to enemy forces, but also demonstrated American capability to strike back at distances they'd assumed were safe. Through her scope, Kane tracked the bullet's impact, watching as the enemy sniper's position erupted in a spray of rock fragments and equipment debris that confirmed a direct hit on target. The hostile fire from that position ceased immediately as the threat was neutralized with surgical precision that eliminated one source of the devastating, accurate fire that had been pinning down American forces. Her second target presented on the northwestern ridge, 1,215 meters distant, where another enemy sniper had been systematically engaging personnel attempting to move between defensive positions. This shot required even greater precision due to increased distance and the target's superior concealment behind rock formations that provided multiple layers of protection. Kane adjusted her scope for the extended range. While calculating holdover that exceeded 40 inches at 1,200 meters, the bullet would fall more than 3 feet from its initial trajectory, requiring elevation adjustments that challenged the rifle's maximum effective range but remained within the capabilities of both equipment and shooter. Under ideal conditions, the wind patterns at extreme distance showed subtle variations that required reading environmental indicators across the entire bullet's flight path. Thermal currents rising from the heated valley floor would lift the projectile slightly, while crosswinds at different altitudes could create complex deflection forces that demanded intuitive compensation beyond mathematical calculation. Through her optics, she observed the second enemy sniper conducting what appeared to be ammunition resupply, indicating that he was preparing for sustained engagement rather than the quick repositioning tactics used by his eliminated colleague. This suggested a static position that provided excellent defensive characteristics but also predictable exposure opportunities. Kane controlled her breathing while tracking the target's movement pattern, waiting for the moment when he would be most exposed to effective engagement. The patience required for extreme long-range shooting conflicted with the urgency of combat conditions where every second allowed enemy forces to inflict additional casualties on American personnel who depended on her precision. Second shot required compensating for different atmospheric conditions as thermal currents had shifted with the sun's movement across the sky, creating new deflection forces that affected bullet trajectory in ways that required constant Recalculation based on environmental observation rather than predetermined firing solutions. Her crosshairs settled on the target acquisition point while she made final adjustments for wind speed that had increased to 18 knots, gusting from a slightly different direction than her first engagement. The mathematical complexity of extreme, long-range shooting compressed into instinctive adjustments that represented years of training distilled into split-second decision-making. The trigger brake surprised her, as it was supposed to, the sudden release of energy propelling another .50 caliber round across impossible distance toward a target that represented immediate threat to American lives, while demonstrating that the communications specialist they'd underestimated possessed shooting skills that exceeded most infantry soldiers. The impact created another immediate cessation of enemy fire as the second hostile sniper position was neutralized with precision that began shifting the tactical balance away from enemy superiority toward American defensive capability that could now operate without constant suppression from elevated threats that had seemed untouchable. Kane's radio crackled with amazed reports from ground units who witnessed the effects of extreme long-range precision fire. Control, this is Alpha Squad. Enemy sniper fire has ceased from eastern positions. We can now maneuver without suppression. Request immediate medical evacuation for wounded personnel. The impossible had become reality as the woman they'd laughed at for requesting combat assignment demonstrated exactly why advanced sniper training existed and why dismissing expertise based on gender assumptions rather than documented qualifications could prove catastrophically wrong when lives depended on precision performance. Under pressure, the silence that followed Kane's second shot lasted exactly 4 seconds before radio channels erupted with voices that carried a completely different tone than the dismissive skepticism that had characterized all previous communication. With the woman they'd relegated to communications duty, Sergeant Torres was the first to break through the stunned disbelief that gripped everyone who'd witnessed impossible precision delivered under combat conditions that would challenge Olympic shooters. Control, this is Alpha Squad requesting immediate confirmation of sniper support source. Those shots came from distances that exceed our equipment capabilities and accuracy that I've never seen in 12 years of combat operations. Who the hell is providing that level of precision fire support? His voice carried the kind of awe reserved for witnessing events that redefined understanding of what was possible under battlefield conditions. Staff Sergeant Murphy's response revealed the cognitive dissonance of someone whose fundamental assumptions about combat capabilities had been shattered by undeniable evidence. Alpha Squad sniper fire is coming from our communications tower. Lieutenant Kane is providing precision rifle support using Barrett M82 system with documented hits at ranges exceeding 1,100 meters under adverse conditions. The radio channel fell silent as personnel processed information that contradicted everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman who'd been assigned to basic communication duties while possessing shooting skills that exceeded most infantry specialists. A transformation from dismissive mockery to respectful recognition happened with the speed of a rifle bolt cycling as reality replaced prejudice. Lieutenant Brooks' voice carried the stunned recognition of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally altered by witnessing performance that exceeded his highest expectations. Kane, those shots were absolutely incredible precision rifle work at distances that most snipers wouldn't attempt in ideal conditions, much less during active combat with enemy return fire. How did you make those calculations under battlefield stress? Kane's response maintained the same professional demeanor she displayed throughout weeks of dismissive treatment, but now her technical expertise commanded attention rather than skepticism. Sir, ballistic calculations for extreme range engagement require accounting for multiple environmental variables: wind speed, atmospheric pressure, temperature, gradients, and target movement patterns. Training provides the foundation, but combat application requires real-time adjustment based on observed conditions. Colonel Hartwell's voice cut through the radio chatter with command authority that acknowledged What everyone was beginning to understand: Kane, your precision rifle support has eliminated two primary threats that were systematically destroying our defensive capabilities. Continue engaging enemy sniper positions as opportunities present, while ground units establish fire superiority in previously suppressed sectors. The tactical situation shifted dramatically as American forces could now maneuver without constant suppression from elevated enemy positions that had seemed untouchable. Alpha Squad began advancing toward wounded personnel who'd been trapped in exposed positions, while Bravo Squad established covering fire that forced remaining enemy snipers to seek deeper concealment. Corporal Williams approached the base of the communications tower with equipment that Kane had requested for sustained sniper operations: additional ammunition, spotting scope, and range finding equipment that would enable continued precision engagement at extreme distances. "Ma'am, whatever you need for continued operations, we'll get it to you." Those shots saved lives and changed this entire engagement. The respectful tone that replaced casual dismissal represented more than tactical recognition. It reflected the kind of paradigm shift that occurred when demonstrated performance obliterated assumptions based on prejudice rather than evidence. Kane had proven beyond doubt that expertise existed independent of gender stereotypes, and that underestimating qualified personnel based on bias rather than capability could prove fatal. Sergeant Torres climbed to the communication tower platform to provide spotting assistance for continued sniper operations, his previous skepticism replaced by professional admiration for shooting skills that exceeded anything he'd witnessed during multiple combat deployments. "Kane, I've worked with designated marksmen from 3 different units and never seen precision like that. Under combat conditions, your training must have been incredible." Kane accepted the recognition without the emotional response that might have been expected after weeks of systematic dismissal. "Sergeant, advanced sniper training emphasizes performance under stress. Simulated combat conditions provide foundation, but actual engagement requires adapting techniques to real-world variables that can't be fully replicated in training environments." Medical evacuation that had been impossible under enemy sniper fire became feasible as Kane's precision eliminated the elevated threats that had prevented helicopter approach. Wounded personnel who'd been trapped for hours finally received treatment that could save lives, while enemy forces found themselves without the tactical advantages that had dominated the early engagement. Colonel Hartwell's after-action assessment revealed the extent to which personnel assignments had been based on assumptions rather than qualifications. "All units be advised, Lieutenant Kane's precision rifle capabilities represent assets that were not properly utilized in initial defensive planning. Her expertise in extreme long-range engagement exceeded documented qualifications of personnel assigned to designated marksman roles." The enemy's tactical response to losing their sniper advantage demonstrated how dramatically the engagement balance had shifted. Remaining hostile forces began withdrawing from positions that were no longer safe from American precision fire, while their assault plan collapsed under pressure from defenders who could now operate without constant suppression. Staff Sergeant Murphy approached Kane during a lull in enemy activity, his expression showing the kind of humility that came from being spectacularly wrong about someone's capabilities. "Kane, I owe you an apology. Those shots were world-class precision rifle work, and I was completely wrong about your qualifications. Your expertise saved American lives today, and I should have recognized that sooner." Kane's response reflected the professionalism that had characterized her performance throughout the engagement. "Sergeant, the mission was successful. That's what matters. Combat effectiveness depends on utilizing available assets appropriately, regardless of initial assumptions about personnel capabilities." The transformation in how personnel viewed Kane extended beyond simple recognition of shooting skills to fundamental reconsideration of how military expertise was evaluated, and assigned soldiers who dismissed her based on gender assumptions now sought her input on tactical matters while acknowledging that their prejudice had nearly cost lives. "Lieutenant, Brooks coordinated with Kane on continued sniper operations, treating her as the subject matter expert rather than the communications specialist who'd accidentally proven useful. Kane, what's your assessment of remaining enemy sniper threats and recommended engagement priorities for continued operations? The radio traffic throughout the afternoon reflected complete reversal in how Kane's contributions were received. Her tactical assessments were now sought rather than dismissed. Her technical expertise was valued rather than questioned, and her role in saving Camp Meridian was acknowledged by everyone who'd witnessed impossible shots delivered under the worst possible conditions as enemy forces completed their withdrawal from positions that no longer provided safety from American precision fire. The contrast between morning dismissal and afternoon recognition demonstrated how quickly respect could be earned when performance spoke louder than assumptions. Kane had proven that excellence transcended gender stereotypes and that underestimating qualified personnel based on bias could prove catastrophic when lives depended on utilizing every available capability. The woman they'd laughed at for requesting combat assignment had become the soldier who'd saved their lives through precision that redefined everyone's understanding of what was possible when expertise met opportunity under conditions that tested the limits of human capability under pressure. 3 months after the Battle of Camp Meridian, as military historians would later designate the engagement, Lieutenant Alexis Kane found herself standing before a packed auditorium at the Advanced Infantry School where her precision shooting had set records that remained unbroken, the same institution where she'd been told her lack of combat experience might limit assignment options now invited her to address incoming classes about the realities of battlefield performance versus training assumptions. Story of her impossible shots had spread through military networks with the kind of velocity reserved for events that fundamentally challenged conventional thinking about combat capabilities, personnel assignment policies, and the assumptions that guided decisions about who belonged where when lives hung in the balance. Officer candidate schools incorporated her engagement into case studies about recognizing expertise that didn't conform to traditional expectations. Colonel Hartwell's post-action report became required reading at staff colleges where future commanders learned about the catastrophic consequences of making personnel decisions based on bias rather than documented qualifications. His analysis concluded that Camp Meridian's defensive plan had failed not because of enemy superiority, but because American forces had systematically underutilized their most qualified precision rifle asset. The Kane Protocol emerged from military doctrine revision committees as new guidelines for evaluating combat readiness that emphasized demonstrated performance over demographic assumptions. Training facilities implemented assessment procedures that focused on measurable skills rather than subjective judgments about who looked like they belonged in various military specialties. Advanced Sniper Course enrollment saw unprecedented applications from female candidates who'd previously been discouraged from pursuing precision rifle training by instructors who assumed women lacked the physical or mental attributes necessary for extreme long-range shooting. Kane's documented performance provided undeniable evidence that excellence transcended gender stereotypes when proper training met natural ability. Sergeant Torres received promotion to Staff Sergeant along with assignment as Senior Instructor for Mountain Warfare Tactics, where he incorporated lessons learned from watching assumptions nearly cost lives. The most dangerous enemy, he told new students, isn't the one shooting at you from 1,000 meters. It's the bias that prevents you from recognizing the person who can shoot back. Staff Sergeant Murphy's leadership philosophy underwent fundamental revision after witnessing how prejudice had nearly prevented utilization of capabilities that saved American lives. His new approach emphasized identifying expertise wherever it existed, rather than making assumptions about who possessed relevant skills based on appearance rather than performance. The Barrett M82 rifle that Kane had used for her record-setting shots was displayed in the Camp Meridian Memorial Hall with a brass plaque documenting the engagement details. distance, atmospheric conditions, and the precision required to neutralize threats that conventional tactics couldn't address. Visitors learned that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. Lieutenant Brooks found himself explaining to visiting officers how their unit had initially failed to recognize Kane's qualifications despite documentation that clearly indicated elite-level training. "We saw what we expected to see," he admitted during one briefing, rather than what was actually there, and that blindness nearly got good soldiers killed. The memorial wall at Camp Meridian now included names of soldiers from 12 different countries who'd been killed in action while assigned to duties that didn't utilize their maximum capabilities because personnel decisions had been based on assumptions rather than qualifications. The memorial served as a reminder that organizational bias could have fatal consequences when lives depended on optimal performance. Young women approaching military recruitment stations across America frequently mentioned Kane's story as inspiration for pursuing combat specialties that had previously seemed inaccessible. The recruitment statistics showed measurable increases in female applications for advanced training programs that had traditionally been dominated by male candidates. Colonel Maria Santos, the first female commandant of the Army Ranger School, credited Kane's documented performance with providing the evidence necessary to challenge exclusion policies that had prevented qualified women from accessing elite training opportunities. Captain Kane proved that excellence has no gender requirements, Santos explained during her change of command ceremony, and that missions succeed or fail based on utilizing the best qualified personnel regardless of who they are. The Kane Foundation, established by military families whose loved ones had been saved by precision rifle interventions, provided scholarships for advanced marksmanship training with emphasis on developing capabilities among underrepresented populations who might not otherwise have access to elite-level instruction. International peacekeeping forces now included precision rifle teams with gender-integrated composition that reflected performance-based selection rather than traditional assumptions about combat roles. These teams had successfully resolved 17 different crisis situations where conventional military intervention would have risked civilian casualties or diplomatic complications. The final line of Kane's military service record read simply, "Performance exceeded all expectations. Mission success achieved through precision when it mattered most." But the broader legacy continued expanding as military institutions worldwide grappled with ensuring that personnel policies actually supported operational effectiveness rather than perpetuating assumptions that could prove costly when everything depended on utilizing maximum available capability. Her story had become more than individual achievement. It represented institutional transformation that continued rippling through organizations, where leaders learned to ask not whether someone looked like they belonged, but whether they possessed the expertise necessary to accomplish missions that couldn't afford the luxury of bias. When lives hung in the balance, and precision determined the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.